When Denzel Washington walked into one of California's most exclusive car dealerships, no one recognized the iconic actor and humanitarian. That's when an arrogant manager made the biggest mistake of his career, trying to kick out and belittle a man he assumed didn't belong. What he didn't realize was that Denzel wasn't just browsing, he was the dealership's new owner. And what happened next became a powerful reminder of humility, grace, and second chances. Because in true Denzel Washington fashion, he didn't raise his voice, he raised the standard, and he turned one man's arrogance into a masterclass on what leadership really looks like. The glass doors of Harlan Ridge Motors slid open with a soft whoosh, letting in a gust of warm air and a man dressed in quiet simplicity. A black hoodie, a worn pair of jeans, a baseball cap pulled low over his brow, sunglasses shielding a gaze that had seen more than most could imagine. Denzel Washington stepped into the gleaming, high-end dealership like a whisper in a world built to shout. No one turned to greet him. No one offered a brochure or a practiced smile. The salesmen were too busy laughing near the espresso bar, and the receptionist barely glanced up from her phone. It wasn't that they didn't notice him, it was that they didn't care to. In their world, look spoke louder than presence, and Denzel, in that moment, didn't look like money. He moved slowly, deliberately, his steps silent against the polished white tile floor. He paused at a sleek, matte black sports coupe, tracing its contours with his eyes. Then to a luxury SUV, admiring the craftsmanship, the quiet power underneath. He asked a question, softly, something about hybrid torque ratios. But the salesman he addressed gave a nod without really listening, and drifted off mid-sentence. At the far end of the showroom, a man in a tailored vest and expensive shoes watched with narrowed eyes. Craig Simmons, general manager, sharp-tongued, sharper ego. To him, time was money, and people who didn't look like they had either weren't worth a second glance. He watched the hooded figure move from vehicle to vehicle and felt irritation rise like steam off hot concrete. Denzel took his time. He wasn't in a rush. He had no entourage, no flash, just presence. He stopped in front of a limited edition convertible and crouched slightly to study the wheels. The dealership buzzed around him, sales banter, the ring of a phone, the soft murmur of background jazz, but he was in no hurry to disrupt the rhythm. He was just there, watching, thinking. And yet, even before a word had been spoken, Craig Simmons had already made up his mind about him. Not worth the time, not worth the effort, just another browser who didn't belong. And with that thought, Craig straightened his tie and started walking over. Craig Simmons walked like a man who had somewhere more important to be. Chin slightly raised, hands clasped in front of him like he was guarding a secret no one else was smart enough to understand. He approached Denzel slowly, deliberately, the smirk already tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Afternoon," Craig said, his voice oozing with the kind of politeness that wasn't meant to be polite at all. "Can I help you before security does?" Denzel looked up, calm, his sunglasses still in place. He didn't flinch, didn't react. He simply stood, brushed his palms together lightly, and replied with the same quiet composure he always carried. "I was just thinking of buying." Craig's laugh was short, clipped. "Right," he said, letting the word hang like smoke in the air. "Well, these vehicles aren't exactly on layaway. If you're looking for something a little more your speed, there's a used lot about 2 miles down the road. Real friendly folks over there." The silence that followed was thick. Denzel didn't argue. He didn't explain who he was or why he was there. He didn't pull off the sunglasses or flash a smile or correct the man's assumption. He simply nodded once. "I see," he said. Craig stepped aside, already bored. "Have a good one," he muttered, turning away before Denzel even began to walk. Denzel left without a word, without a fuss. He didn't slam the door or throw a glare over his shoulder. He just walked. Past the rows of luxury cars, past the receptionist still glued to her screen, past the showroom windows that reflected a world too obsessed with appearances to see what stood in front of them. The door slid shut behind him, and the dealership returned to its routine. But not for long. Because while Craig Simmons straightened his vest and returned to his office satisfied, convinced he'd handled a situation, he had no idea what he'd just done. He hadn't dismissed a loiterer. He'd just kicked out the man who would soon own every inch of the floor he was standing on. And the reckoning was coming. Ava Mitchell had been restocking brochures when she saw him, just a glimpse at first, a figure moving through the rows of high-end vehicles with a quiet confidence that didn't match his clothes. She'd worked the floor at Harlan Ridge for a little over a year, long enough to know the difference between someone browsing for fun and someone browsing with intention. She watched as Craig brushed him off and sent him packing. Something in her gut twisted. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't pushed back, he had just nodded and walked out. It wasn't until he was gone that she realized what had been bugging her the entire time. That voice, that walk, the way he carried himself like he'd seen everything this world had to offer and still had more to say. She turned to her phone and pulled up Google. It took less than a minute. Her screen filled with photos, movie stills, red carpet appearances, interviews, and there he was, Denzel Washington, right there in the dealership an hour ago. And Craig had kicked him out like he was loitering. Her heart skipped. She glanced toward Craig's office, the blinds half closed, his voice echoing from a call she could already tell was more bark than business. She considered walking in, telling him, showing him, but she didn't. Because Ava knew Craig Simmons, knew how he dismissed things that didn't fit his version of control, knew how he talked down to staff when they spoke up, how he prided himself on being the final say. She slipped her phone into her pocket, her mind racing. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe it was just a fluke. Maybe Denzel had wandered in, changed his mind, and moved on. But deep down, Ava knew better. People like that don't just show up by accident. She kept her head down for the rest of the day, but her eyes stayed sharp, watching, waiting, wondering if the man Craig had sent away without a second thought was about to become a storm none of them were ready for. And the storm was already rolling in. The sun dipped low behind the Monterey Hills, casting long amber shadows across the coastline. A sleek black town car pulled into the private driveway of a villa tucked away from the noise of the world. Inside, the lights were warm, the setting quiet, intimate, intentional. Denzel Washington stepped out of the car, his expression unreadable, his pace unhurried. He didn't dress like a mogul. He didn't need to. He walked through the front door and was greeted by an older man seated by the fireplace, sipping whiskey in a crystal glass. "Right on time," the man said, smiling as he stood. "Wouldn't miss it," Denzel replied, shaking his hand firmly. This was Charles Wexley, founder of Wexley Auto Group, a man who'd built a chain of luxury dealerships from scratch and now, after nearly 40 years, was preparing to hand over the reins. But not to just anyone. This meeting had been in the works for months, quiet, confidential, by design. Denzel took a seat opposite him. No lawyers, no press. Just two men with a shared understanding of what mattered. "Got your wire this morning," Charles said, settling back into his chair. "You now own 51% of the Wexley Group. Guess that makes you the boss." Denzel nodded slowly. "Doesn't feel like a power play, more like alignment." Charles chuckled. "Still speaking riddles, I see." "I believe in what you built," Denzel said. "The legacy, the intention. But somewhere along the way, people forgot it's not just about cars. It's about people, experience, dignity. You don't need to wear a Rolex to deserve respect." Charles studied him for a moment. "You're not just here to collect a check, are you?" "No," Denzel said, his voice calm but resolute. "I'm here to change the tone, from the top down." There was a pause. Then Charles raised his glass. To new beginnings. They clinked glasses, the quiet clink echoing like a promise. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, a shift was already taking place. The man who had been dismissed as invisible that morning now held the future of the entire dealership in his hands. And by morning, the real work would begin. The morning air inside Harlan Ridge Motors was thick with confusion. The usual rhythm, coffee runs, car preps, idle chatter, was broken by a sudden all-staff email titled, simply, Mandatory Meeting, 8:30 a.m., Showroom Floor. Craig Simmons rolled his eyes as he sipped his oat milk latte. Great. Another surprise from corporate, he muttered, straightening his tie in the reflection of a glossy SUV. He didn't like surprises. He liked control. Sales reps gathered in scattered clumps near the center display. Ava stood quietly near the back, arms folded, watching the room shift. She already had a feeling. The kind you don't say out loud, but can feel in your chest. A pressure. A truth on the way. At precisely 8:30, the regional director, Martin Holt, stepped forward. A man not known for making appearances unless something big was happening. His suit was sharp, but his expression was sharper, serious, focused. "Good morning," he began. "I'll get straight to it. Wexley Auto Group has undergone a change in ownership, effective immediately." Murmurs rippled through the room. Craig crossed his arms, a tight smirk forming on his lips. "Great," he whispered under his breath. "New corporate clown with new rules." Martin didn't flinch. He simply turned toward the side door. "Please join me in welcoming the new majority owner of Harlan Ridge Motors, Mr. Denzel Washington." The door opened, and the room went still. Denzel walked in with quiet authority, no flash, no fanfare. Just presence. The kind that didn't need to be explained, the kind that silenced a room not with volume, but gravity. Ava's breath caught. A few others blinked, stunned. And Craig didn't move. He didn't speak. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Denzel stood next to Martin, his gaze sweeping the room once. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just nodded. "Good to be here," he said simply. Martin clapped a hand on his shoulder, then added, "Mr. Washington isn't just investing in our name. He's investing in our values." The crowd remained silent. All except Craig, who was now suddenly aware that the man he'd kicked out yesterday was now the man signing his paycheck. The staff slowly drifted back to their posts, whispers trailing behind them like shadows. No one said much. They didn't have to. The shift in energy was undeniable, the kind you don't recover from with a quick joke or an awkward shrug. Craig Simmons lingered behind, hovering near the coffee bar, trying to look unfazed. But his jaw was tight, his mind racing. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had humiliated the new owner. "Craig," came a voice from behind, calm, even, but unmistakable. Craig turned. Denzel stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. No anger, no performance, just presence. "Can we talk?" Denzel asked. Craig nodded quickly. "Of course, yes, my office." Denzel didn't respond. He simply turned and walked toward the glass-walled corner room. Craig followed, suddenly more aware of every step, every breath. He closed the door behind them, the sound echoing louder than he wanted it to. "Listen," Craig began, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "I owe you an apology. Yesterday, I didn't recognize you. If I had known—" Denzel held up a hand. "That's not the problem," he said. Craig blinked. I was under a lot of pressure. It was a busy morning. We get a lot of people walking in off the street." Denzel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You weren't rude because you didn't recognize me, Craig," he said. "You were rude because you didn't respect me." Craig looked away. "You didn't know my name, but you decided I wasn't worth your time. You assumed based on how I looked, how I spoke. You didn't see a customer. You saw a problem." The words weren't loud, but they landed heavy, Denzel stepped closer, folding his arms. "And that's not just how you treated me, that's how you treat people. I've watched. You lead with ego, not with empathy. And leadership without empathy, that's not leadership at all." Craig swallowed, his voice suddenly dry. I didn't mean..." Denzel's tone sharpened just slightly. "It wasn't about who I was, Craig," he said. He paused, letting the silence fill the room. "It was about who you are." And with that, he turned, opened the door, and walked out, leaving Craig alone with the truth. The next few days at Harlan Ridge Motors felt less like business as usual and more like the start of something different. Denzel didn't walk in with a clipboard or a swarm of consultants. He didn't bark orders or rearrange the entire showroom. He simply showed up, early, quietly, every morning, watching, listening, moving from department to department like a shadow with purpose. He sat with service techs as they worked on engines. He rode with sales reps during test drives. He even spent an hour behind the reception desk, greeting walk-ins and answering phones with the same calm presence he brought to everything, and people noticed. Not because he was Denzel Washington, but because he cared. He asked questions, real ones. How often do you feel rushed with a customer? What do you wish management understood better? When's the last time someone thanked you for doing your job right? He didn't take notes. He remembered. By Friday, the atmosphere had changed. People stood a little straighter, smiled a little easier. The tension that had once buzzed beneath the surface began to dissolve. That morning, he called a meeting. Ava stood near the back, as she usually did, until Denzel looked directly at her. "Ava," he said, motioning her forward, "I'd like to make something clear in front of everyone here." She stepped forward slowly, unsure. "This is someone who understands what it means to lead with respect, someone who saw me when no one else did. That's the kind of person I want, setting the tone here." A beat of silence. Then he added, "Effective immediately, Ava is being promoted to floor manager." Gasps, a few quiet claps. Ava stood stunned, and then all eyes turned to Craig. He stood off to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight. Denzel didn't make a show of it. He simply turned to him and said, "You have two choices. Step down and commit to retraining with the rest of the staff, or walk away." Craig didn't speak, not at first, but he nodded. And for the first time in his career, Craig Simmons took a step back, not because he was forced to, because he was finally being held accountable. It started with a single tweet, a blurry photo snapped through the showroom glass. Denzel Washington standing beside a sales associate, smiling faintly, holding a cup of coffee. The caption read, "Just found out Denzel Washington bought the dealership that kicked him out last week. ICON." The tweet caught fire. Within hours, it had been reposted by bloggers, influencers, even local news stations. Someone else uploaded a short clip from a security camera, a grainy, silent video of Craig Simmons gesturing toward the door as Denzel calmly walked away. No drama, no argument, just quiet dismissal. The internet did the rest. He didn't argue, he didn't shout, he bought the place. This is how you check arrogance, with grace. Denzel is him. By the end of the day, the story had gone viral. Major outlets picked it up. Oscar winner turns disrespect into ownership opportunity. Talk shows mentioned it. Reaction videos flooded TikTok. Celebrities chimed in. Customers started calling just to ask if the story was real. And when they were told yes, they started showing up. Foot traffic doubled that weekend. People didn't just come to shop. They came to see, to feel the shift, the aura, the presence. Some asked for Ava by name. Others posed in front of the dealership sign like it was a movie set. Inside, the team was energized. Employees who'd felt invisible now felt seen. They were undergoing customer-first training, something Denzel had introduced personally. The program focused not just on selling, but listening, connecting, respecting. And it worked. One customer, an elderly man in a faded Marine Corps cap, teared up after a test drive. "Never been treated this well in a dealership," he said. "Didn't think people did business like this anymore." Meanwhile, Craig Simmons stayed quiet. He completed his retraining modules. He shadowed Ava. He said less and listened more. And outside, the world kept watching. Because what had started as a moment of quiet disrespect had turned into a public masterclass on humility, leadership, and how you treat people when no one's looking. And Denzel Washington had done it all without raising his voice once. Craig Simmons was drowning in a world he used to control. The floor was different now, slower but sharper. Less about pushing product, more about hearing people. The pressure hadn't disappeared, it had just changed shape. Now it came in the form of accountability, eye contact, honest answers, and Craig wasn't used to that. He spent the next few weeks shadowing Ava, watching her guide the team with ease, empathy, and quiet confidence. She didn't bark orders. She didn't chase quotas. But people listened to her anyway, and worse, they liked her for it. Craig completed his mandatory training with the same tight jaw and silent resentment he wore like a second skin. He showed up, did the work, but behind his eyes, the fight was still there. Not with anyone else, with himself. One evening, after the floor had cleared and the lights dimmed, Denzel stepped into Craig's office. No crowd, no speech, just one man standing across from another. "You holding up?" Denzel asked, leaning lightly against the doorframe. Craig shrugged. "I'm still here." "That's something," Denzel said, folding his arms. Craig stared at the desk, papers in neat piles. A job he used to define himself by now, reduced to a question mark. "I don't know if I can work like this," he finally admitted. "Feels like I've already lost." Denzel nodded once. "Maybe that's the point. Sometimes you've got to lose the old version of yourself to earn a better one." Craig didn't speak. He just sat with it, the weight, the choice. "Look," Denzel continued, voice low, steady, "I'm not here to tear anyone down. But this place, it needed a reset. You've got the experience, but what you do with it next, that's on you." He paused at the door, hand on the frame. "Change is possible, Craig, but you have to want it." And then he was gone, leaving Craig alone in a quiet office with nothing but his reflection in the darkened glass. That night, Craig sat long after closing. No email, no announcement, no final decision, just silence, and the slow turn of a man deciding what kind of person he wanted to be when the lights came back on. 3 weeks later, a sleek black sedan pulled into the Harlan Ridge Motors lot. The morning sun glinted off the polished hoods, lined in perfect symmetry. The dealership looked the same on the outside, but the energy inside had shifted. You could feel it the second the doors opened. Denzel stepped out of the car in a tailored charcoal suit, the crisp lines catching just enough light to remind everyone who he was and what he stood for. Inside, the floor was alive, a soft buzz of conversation, warm greetings, laughter that didn't feel forced. The staff didn't just work at Harlan Ridge anymore, they belonged to it. Ava stood at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, offering a handshake to a new hire with one hand and a bottle of water to a customer with the other. She was poised, confident, in command, but never commanding. She caught Denzel's eye from across the room and her face lit up. He gave a slight nod, one of quiet pride. She didn't need a speech, she was already proving everything he'd hoped. Denzel walked through slowly, observing without intruding. Customers were being treated like people, not paychecks. Team members collaborated instead of competing. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Then he saw him. In the distance, near the service bay, a man knelt beside a line of freshly detailed cars, wiping down mirrors and polishing door handles with quiet focus. Craig. He wasn't barking orders, wasn't hiding in an office, just working, simple, steady. No one had to say it. He had stayed, not because he had to, Because he wanted to try. Denzel didn't approach, didn't interrupt. He just watched for a moment, then smiled faintly, more to himself than anyone else. He turned and walked back toward the exit, passing by rows of customers, new hires, and a culture he had helped rebuild, not by force, but by example. The doors slid open, the sun hit his shoulders, and behind him, the dealership thrived. A quiet revolution, born from respect, built to last. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.